What LinkedIn does for you, they issue you a bleached white skeleton of yourself. So they issue that to you. And then what is expected is over time, it is your job to add muscle, tendons. If you want a high-performing team, you have to really learn to listen. Bigger the project and the more involved and the different teams that are involved, you've got to keep all stakeholders up to date on what's going on. You don't really need to train a high-performing team. What you have to do is try to listen and bring out the best in every individual and how they can contribute to the team. The most important thing about LinkedIn is your profile, because if you spend any time on other stuff, so people want to come back and say, okay, let me see who this Melissa person is. It's how you tell the story. And that's why storytelling is so important, and the structure to it.
Welcome to the Executive Connect podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Arskog, and today I'm excited to talk with Joseph Frankie III, a West Point graduate, a combat veteran, a coach, and a LinkedIn thought leader. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Hey, Melissa, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you. I love your background and your career. You have such a diverse background from military and corporate. In your experience, what are some key ingredients of a high-performing team in leadership?
I always go back to some of the basics, right? If you want a high-performing team, you have to really learn to listen. Okay, because you don't really need to train a high-performing team. What you have to do is try to listen and bring out the best in every individual and how they can contribute to the team. And then secondly, if you're choosing or trying to make a team, I always try to pick people that are much smarter than me, because if I'm the smartest guy in the room, we have a problem.
So true. I think that's a great nugget is up level your circle. And one of the things I love and appreciate about you is your adaptability and how many times you've changed and learned in this fast-paced world we're all living in. So from your perspective, how can leaders build those teams without compromising, their relationships internally, changing circumstances, AI, technology, all the things that leaders are up against these days, remote employees. So how can they really build teams in a way where everybody's working together and evolving?
Well, I think we're right back to listening, right? Because the reason somebody can't produce is maybe they need some technology on their end. If they're remote workers, maybe they need some help with this or that. Timing of when people are available, in today's world makes a big difference. I mean, some people are morning people, some people are get their creativity later on. And the question becomes is how adaptable can we, the team, be to try to accommodate everybody? And you can't do everything. And all the team needs to recognize is that we're all trying, to do the best things that we can do to make the team productive. In other words,
Yeah, I agree.
People do not wake up in the morning and say, I want to go to work and do a bad job. So usually there's a lot of things going on. In fact, the most recent topic that I was in Austin was about how reorganizations are doing. And, that has to do with, your particular team. I've got 3 different clients right now that are going through reorganization, or whatever euphemism you want to label that with. But stuff is afoot. It's changing. The organization's going to readapt, take resources either in labor, money, and, redevote that into areas that they think are prudent. And 2 of those are just absolute disasters, and what I'm trying to do with the clients is extricate them, get them another opportunity, because they just realize that this, their team's not productive. They've got no communication. They don't know where the organization's headed. They don't know if they're part of it. all that kind of stuff. In contrast to another one where it's really going well, all the leadership's involved at all levels, they're transparent in their communications. That's hard work to be transparent on multiple levels where you're getting it from the company, you're getting basically the same message both verbally and in writing from your supervisors, and they're actually letting the rank and file make decisions on how they need to adapt and change to achieve those particular objectives. It's not easy. It's hard work, and everybody's got to be involved. But that's one example.
Yeah, that's a really good example. I know that you've worked on projects that are worth billions of dollars and led teams of 50,000 or more. In your experience, what is one of the biggest leadership challenges that you faced, and what did you learn from it?
I think communication is the biggest challenge. The bigger the project and the more involved and the different teams that are involved, you've got to keep all stakeholders, up to date on what's going on. And, even with all the king's horses and all the king's men, you're still going to fail at that in certain areas. But the fact that you try to use multiple communication channels to keep stuff up to date is absolutely key. And the bigger the project, the harder it is to measure whether you're making any difference or you're moving this thing along. Because the more strategic it is, you probably can't measure it for a year. It's just, the smaller it gets, you can see stuff happen, relatively quickly. But the bigger it is, the harder it is to put in what are the metrics. How are we moving this needle? And naturally leadership always wants these reports on, hey, we've invested all this money. What are we going to get from it? And you've really got to be a good communicator to keep everybody, together and heading in the right directions. If you don't put those aspects in place before you start, then you start the project and then you're herding cats. And it's not pretty.
Are you a high-income professional looking for smarter ways to protect your wealth? The Texas Freedom Fund gives you the opportunity to invest in energy assets leveraging proven fracking technology and prime access to global markets. With strategic oil and gas investments, you can build real wealth while benefiting from tax advantages under laws dating back to the Reagan era. Take control of your financial future. Visit texasfreedomfund.executiveconnectpodcast.com.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good thing to unpack communication. We're in a really fast-paced world. There's constant pop-ups, there's constant things coming at us. A lot of times I find I sit in meetings and I'll hear people say, "Okay, you got it, go." And I'm looking at my notepad and I'm like, "Okay, I think I got it." And like you said, a lot is lost. The way that people are communicating now, I think of it like a pie chart. We're getting a lot of information, but maybe not a full piece of the pie chart to understand what our part is with whatever we're being talked to at. And so a lot of times I like to finish communication and revisit, John, you're doing this, Susie, you're doing that. Any questions? If you need support, reach out to me. And I like to make sure everyone's clear. But I know, like you said, for myself, I've been a part of those many, many meetings where I look down at my paper and I think to myself, I don't got it. I don't understand. I think I understand, but one of the things I learned is if you don't understand and you're not really good at communication, we need to practice it. I think a lot of times when people are working remote or they're working, in silos, not in a team constantly, we kind of lose some of those communication skills. So I like to suggest to people go to networking events, get in places where you're using that dialogue to communicate with people. And so I want to kind of unpack what you said a little bit about, you know, making sure stakeholders are aware. Like in that example, I look down at my pad and I know that I don't understand what's going on, but I know my piece of the puzzle is going to affect all the people that are involved in that team. So, from your perspective, share with our listeners some ways that people can make sure that they're collaborating with those stakeholders that you mentioned.
Well, I think you mentioned a very, very important tool, which the military calls it a back brief. You sat through a mission order, and it's got a very structured standard to it. We called it the 5-paragraph order, where all right, what's the mission? Here's the things that affect it. Here's the logistics. Here's the communication. All those kind of things. But you've listened to that, and so I think good leaders say, okay, we put this plan, mission together. Okay, what did you hear from that? And the back brief is, okay, that you're listening to what their interpretation is. And just like you say, it gets straightened out, right then and there. The other technique that I saw one of the CEOs I worked for, with especially the upper leadership, from 7 in the morning to 7:15 was a stand-up, and there was about 6 of us in there. And he just went around to all 6 of us, and we each had about a minute. And, if we needed something from him, that was the time to kind of say that. And we didn't even sit down. You were in there with your 3x5 card or your pad, on what you were going to say. And boy, it had to be condensed, because, we were off to the races. But what I found is, as everybody got conditioned, used to, gosh, what a saving of time. A lot of that stuff, because you and I were talking a little bit earlier, but I mean, you can get a lot of communication really quick face to face, because you've got all the nonverbal communication, everything's working. And just think about how much email we'd have to put together, and then send it to the collective group before you take it to the leader, right?
And that's a really good point. I want to separate what you're saying and unpack that. So, face to face, we're able to use all of our senses. We can tell tone, we can tell body language, we can understand people much better than an email. I know I've been the recipient of emails that I didn't take offense to, and I'd have a peer call me and say, "Oh my God, can you believe that email?" What I didn't take offense to was short, succinct, to the point. Other people did, and they extracted from an email emotion and things that I believe they shouldn't, because email is much different with emotions than standing in front of a person. So I always tell people, if you get an email, don't read into it, get clarification, or call up that person on the phone, or call them up in Teams. And you can use more of your senses versus words. Like people like me, I'm an engineer brain kind of gal. I'm not wordy in email. But a lot of other people may be wordy and clearly able to communicate what their ask is. So I want to also mention another really great point that you made. A lot of the meat in these meetings, like you said, 60 seconds to debrief. A lot of these meetings that I've been sitting in over the years, the meat of the meeting is towards the end, where there's action, there's clarity. And so I find a lot of times I'll do exactly what we just talked about. Here's your piece, everybody's clear. And I'm not kidding you. Minutes later, I'll get a Teams message or an email. Hey, what was my piece? So for all the people that are not able to focus for 30 minutes or an hour, really paying attention to the end and making sure before you hang up that call that you're clear and not be fearful to ask during that call, because your leaders and your superiors may be on to other things that they might not be able to circle back with you. And so, like you said, getting your 60-second point succinct and organized is going to pay so much down the road in your career.
Well, and secondly, you're in a group setting. You're either prepared or you're not, and it becomes painfully obvious to the casual observer. So I always tell people, I said, if you're going to a meeting, I mean, you got to be ready and have your best foot forward, and that's planning from your end. That because you have no idea when you get in the meeting that you might be reacting to something you didn't know about. I mean, that's your first thing. And I always they say, well, they say, hey, Joe, you're going to the meeting. What do you hope to accomplish? And a lot of times I say, I'm just going to go there. My job is to not let anybody take my stuff, because,
Yeah,
meetings deal with resources, right? So,
100%. Yeah.
so I said, I'm going to attend that meeting. Well, why don't you send so-and-so? And he said, no, at that level, if somebody else is not there, I don't mind taking his or her stuff either. If that's what, we're dividing the pie here on something.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's just collaboration, right? And communication. I think, it's something we all need to work at. And I find that the older I get, the more things are going on in my brain between family and kids and extracurricular activity, my aging parents and everything I've got going on in my life. So, really being clear as we pivot from different facets of our life and communicating with, the ones that we love and the ones that we work with is going to be very important. Speaking of communications, I want to talk a little bit about LinkedIn, all things LinkedIn. I know myself, I was a slow adopter of LinkedIn, and now I'm fast and furious on LinkedIn. And I know you're a LinkedIn thought leader and you've coached people on LinkedIn. I want to get your perspective on why people still struggle to leverage LinkedIn and maybe some advice for people on ways they can leverage LinkedIn.
The way I look at LinkedIn from this standpoint, when day one, when we first got on it, whenever that day was for you, really all to get on LinkedIn, what you need is your name and like a job. I mean, it's pretty basic, And then the idea is, okay, we got you here, and at some point in time, you're going to build this out. So I look at it is what LinkedIn does for you. They issue you a bleached white skeleton of yourself. Okay. Just like the one we saw in the 6th grade science thing that hangs on the side of the science room, And so they issue that to you. And then what is expected is over time, it is your job to add muscle, ligaments, tendons. And if you think about how many different muscles there are in your body, that's how many different things you can add onto a LinkedIn profile. I mean, people basically, I'd say 95% of the people who use LinkedIn like the above the fold of the front page of the Wall Street Journal. But LinkedIn can be the entire Wall Street Journal. In other words, above the fold, below the fold, pages, 2 through 17, op-ed section, finance section, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm a big believer into using it with all its capability because it gives you the ability to tell story after story that you solve problems. Because if you can't solve problems, I mean, there's no reason for you to be employed because what is an employer want? Or if you as an entrepreneur, what are you doing? I mean, you are solving, some sort of customer satisfaction objective. Otherwise, there's no purpose. And so LinkedIn gives you all these other pages, all these other sections to tell those stories. And many times they're not used. I mean, for example, you're used in the volunteer section. I mean, you've got maybe 16, 17 things that, you're volunteering on. And, that is great because a lot of people are not using it to that depth. But if I was going to say something for you, I said the volunteer section gives you 2,000 characters to tell what you do as a volunteer, how you made a difference, who, what, when, where, why, how, and the metrics. As Rudyard Kipling would say, those are the 5 people you need to know. Those questions. So I look at LinkedIn as a place to tell story after story. And you say, well, okay, if I tell all those stories, that, there's a lot of stuff there. And what I'm saying is, how does LinkedIn work? You're in a content war with whoever you think your peer is. And the better content you have, and the more content that you have, the higher you come up in a search. And it's all about the algorithm. And some people said, well, I don't understand about that. And I said, well, let me give you a visual. And he says, okay. I says, right now, you're a coronavirus. I'm a coronavirus. We got our little sphere, right? He says, yeah, I got that. And I said, so every story you tell, you add a little mushroom on your sphere. So do you want to be a mushroom? I mean, do you want to be a coronavirus with one sphere? It means you have to go find the one in 100,000 that you link up with. Or do you want to have a sphere with an infinite number of mushrooms where you can affect 1 out of 10 people? Because you never know what rings somebody's bell. For example, and I learned this years ago, this guy contacted me. He said, Joe, he said, I found you and, I want you to see if you can solve a problem. I said, well, how did you find me? And he said, well, I found you on LinkedIn because you're a blood donor. So I'm thinking, okay, that's in my volunteer section. I mean, what relevance is that? And he said, Joe, I mean, I have a daughter and she requires frequent blood transfusions. So what I've done is I've decided that, if I can, I'm going to do business with blood donors. My point is, nowhere else on the planet would anybody know that I'm a blood donor except on a LinkedIn profile. And so the point I try to say to everybody is you have your own perception of what you think is important. That is not relevant to another human being. Everybody's got a different bell that rings them and motivates them to do stuff. And my point is, tell story after story, and you have a better chance of finding somebody. You and I normally would love to do that in conversation. Okay, but that's additive, right? We're having a conversation. That's the way it's been since the pharaohs, right? But now you have this exponential ability to have coffee 137 times a day virtually. And you're not even there and you don't even know what's happening. And my point is, show up, well-dressed, groomed, like you're going to meet somebody. Or if you're just going to have this profile that's kind of like you're in beach shorts with a torn shirt and going to show up in flip-flops, just put your best foot forward. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, that's a really great point. That analogy when you were saying this, birds of a feather flock together, that I forget who says that saying, but that's an exact really good point that you were saying is people, I know when I started opening myself up on LinkedIn, people are like, I never knew you played sports. I never knew you had kids. I never knew. And people's perspective changed literally overnight when I started putting stuff
Right.
online. And it's funny, people, my LinkedIn has changed year over year over year based on the people that engage with me or what they ask for me and kind of how I live my life. So I've really listened in to the people that follow me and what they want to hear. And so I love that you're talking about that. I want to talk a little bit about your LinkedIn, your book, LinkedIn, the 5-minute drill. Can you break down for our executives that are listening, networking and into a simple process and maybe walk us through some steps professionals can take who are those kind of skeletons on LinkedIn and they do not have anything to date on there. I know, for me, it was being comfortable with being vulnerable about who I am. So I had to take that big leap of faith to put myself out there. But maybe you can walk us through those steps leaders can take with their LinkedIn
Okay,
profile.
so LinkedIn, the 5 minute drill for executive networking success. The hardest thing was to make it an hour read. So Lori Ruff and I said we wanted a person to be able to get on an airplane. They're there for an hour, they read the book, and they could actually take action. So the first part of the book is for the executives that hate LinkedIn. They don't want to do it, but hey, they smart enough to know that they have to be out there, right? I mean, somebody's telling them, hey, sir, you're the front, you're the front leading face of this organization. You got to be out here, and other social media. But the bottom line was to give them a 5 minute drill to go into LinkedIn so that their presence was known, right? Even if it wasn't, they're adding all this content. Let's face it, the top 5% of CEOs, they have marketing departments and, there's professional people doing all that. But for the rest of us mere mortals out here, we gotta saddle up and ride the horse, So what it was a step-by-step thing of how to go into LinkedIn, and was a 5 minute checklist, and I had one executive call me up and he said, Joe, this takes more than 5 minutes. And I said, well, you're not following the checklist. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, it says, go here, do this, go here, do this, go here, do this. And I said, you try it for 2 weeks and you don't do anything other than that checklist. And he calls me back and he said, Joe, you're right. He said, but once I get in there, I want to do other stuff. I said, that's your decision. Everybody wanted a 5 minute drill so they didn't have any of their time taken up. But, what I would say to you is you might need a 5 minute drill in the morning. If you want to do one midday or not, fine, or one at the end of the day. And what happened is, you've got that day kind of covered. So in other words, they're looking at, okay, who said something on their post, they're like it. Somebody, one of their friends, another CEO said something, so maybe you want to go like it, or if you're knowledgeable, you make a 1 sentence comment or something like that. So it was just a rudimentary things of how to go in there if you're not LinkedIn savvy without, doing something stupid. I look at LinkedIn when you first get on it, you're kind of wielding it like a sword, it's two-handed, it's not very deft. And then you get a little bit smarter with it. Now we're got a saber that we can move around. But where you're headed in the power of LinkedIn is when you can use it like a scalpel. But what we have is too many people using a sword to do brain surgery. And, you get the results of when you use a sword to do brain surgery. So my point is LinkedIn's come a long way. It's almost self-teaching now, with all the little suggested tools in there. You can got a little question over here. I mean, when we first got on that, you just kind of had to nug it out and learn by trial and error. But now it's very educational, and there's a lot of information out there. For example, our book in the back's got, okay, you want to learn more? Here's a number of other, resources to hone the tool. What's funny is I wrote this book for the executives, and it's being used in high school business classes.
And that's a really good place for it to start. I think starting young with your branding is really important. I know my branding has changed all the time through my life and my career. When I started at high school and in the banking space, I'm years away from that. And so I think getting out there and explaining the different facets of who you are and what you're made of on the inside, we forget sometimes. Oh, wow, back then I used to do that. I totally forgot about it. But if there's not a place that you're putting it, as we get older and older, we have more things in our mind and more things going on, we tend to forget some things. I want to talk a little bit. You made a comment about the 5 minute drill. So for me, it was hard to do my 5 minutes, 10 minutes every day that I was on social. So I bundle all my drills on the weekend and get all my stuff that I'm posting for the next week done on the weekend. So when I hit Monday for work, I'm ready to go with all my activities that I'm doing. And so if you're a person that can't do it, right before you start the day or at the end of the day for the next day, organize it in a way that works best for your schedule. I think, I correlate it to exercising for me. I used to be like a nighttime exerciser, and now with children, I don't have the cycles to exercise at night. I'm now a morning exerciser. So with social, being able to pivot on what works best for you is going to be key in sustaining your presence online. I want to follow up a question for you and just get your perspective on the way you think people are misusing LinkedIn and how they can fix it.
Well, the most important thing I think about LinkedIn is your profile. I mean, it's kind of like if you're going to run a race, you got to start at the beginning of the race, right? There's a beginning and an end. So I think the most important thing is spend the time on your profile, because if you spend any time on other stuff, so people want to come back and say, okay, let me see who this Melissa person is, right? Well, do you want to be in flip flops, a torn shirt and tennis shoes, or or do you want to be AJ squared away business person, and you can see it it's all laid out here for you. So I think the biggest problem people have is they look at LinkedIn, right? And the way LinkedIn is organized, like anything that's in depth, is there's LinkedIn 101, 201, 301, 401, 501, 601. And I get all these organizations call me, say, Joe, I want you to come here. We're going to give you this insane amount of money, and I want you to give them a 2 hour, I want you to train them on LinkedIn. And I say, save your money. I said, I'm not going to do that. He said, but I will work with the individuals. And he said, well, why do you do that? I said, I can give an orientation on LinkedIn, but unless we're going to put all the 101 people in a room, the 201 people in a room, and the 301, and oh, by the way, nobody needs more than 301 to get what they want. There's PhD level LinkedIn out there, but so what? I mean, for people to get what they want, it's right at the cusp of what I call 301. And if you went to give any subject where somebody's going to give you training, and you're in this room, for an hour, and oh, by the way, you already know that stuff 6 ways from Sunday. I mean, your productivity would be best placed elsewhere. And secondly, you get people in there that don't even have a LinkedIn profile, versus the people that are at the 401 level want to ask you, exponential stuff about the algorithm. The person that doesn't even have a profile says, that's not me.
Right.
So I think it's a very individual thing, and everybody comes up the way they're going to. And and he said, well, I mean, LinkedIn is LinkedIn. I said, no, it's not. I said, LinkedIn is IQ and it's EQ. And they said, well, what's this EQ stuff? And I said, look, when you give somebody a resume, it's a black and white snapshot of who they are, and it's about 95% IQ, right? This is what you've done. This is the problems you solved, all this stuff. But LinkedIn is an oil portrait of yourself. It's not a black and white photograph. It's an oil portrait. It's in color. There's brush strokes on it. There's hue. There's tint. All of the kind of things that you want to describe about yourself. It gives you the capability to do it. Just like the example I give where the CEO calls me up because I'm a blood donor. That's not because I solved a problem in business. That's because emotionally I chose to donate blood, right? It's an emotional connection that he made with me, that started a conversation, which might lead to business, may not. And over the last 10 years, that's been two different people. And that's where I really got, it really reinforced in me is everything that you do that's important to you or whatever you want to put out there because you have no clue what rings somebody else's bell. And see, we have this filter that we're going to put up and say, well, this is what I think, well, it's not important what you think. It's what other people find. For example, another example, I'd say the most money that I've ever made, off of LinkedIn comes from my high school education entry. And people will say, well, why is that important? And it's because people want to go back and, okay, what's the lowest common denominator that we all had? Well, if we're on LinkedIn, we graduated from high school because you got to be able to read and write, to be on LinkedIn. And then it's all that other stuff. Like I'll get somebody call me and say, hey, Joe, I was an offensive center in high school. Well, the only place they could know that is it's on LinkedIn profile. Hey, I got my pilot's license when I went to high school. Hey, I got my scuba diving certification, when I was in high school. I did poetry interpretation in high school. I played tennis, all those kind of things. So education gives you 1,000 characters in the description block, and the idea is if LinkedIn gives me, a bone off that skeleton, then it's my job, to put muscle, ligaments, and tendons there. And so what you have is a lot of people on LinkedIn, they might have a beautiful head of hair and all this stuff, but then they got a bleach white skeleton. The idea is, that I suggest, because there's counter arguments to this too. Some people say all you need is a list of your titles and responsibility, and that's all you need there. And I'd say, well, this algorithm, if other people got the same thing you got and they've got some meat hung there, well, then you come up higher because this thing's looking for words, right? And, a noun and a verb is the basic element that it's searching for, action and a description. And noun and verbs make up sentences, sentences make up paragraphs, and paragraphs tell a story. So I think people just ought to tell story after story about the problems they solve. And that's what happens to me. Somebody calls me up and says, Joe, you probably have handled one of the most unstructured projects in the world. And I have the same thing. I don't know if you can help me, but let's have a discussion. I said, what makes you think I can help you? He said, well, you handled the Kursk Russian submarine rescue operation from a transportation. And the story was interesting because you didn't have any policy in dealing with Russians. There's no manual that says, okay, this is how we're going to rescue this Russian submarine. So all of the people that worked on it, and I'm just one, but my job was to help in the transportation of assets and people to get to a certain place. The bottom line is they never called and asked for that. They let those people die down there, which is a different story. But my point is that story is on my LinkedIn profile in a project because that's what it was. It was a Kursk Russian submarine rescue operation project. It had a start, it had an end, and there was a story. And so people look at that and say, well, I have this really complicated project. Can you help me with this? And some I could, and some, I said, hey, I don't have that depth of experience. Well, why don't you go over here? But there was never any tool before LinkedIn where you can hang that out there and somebody could find it. And what you're really wanting LinkedIn is somebody to message you or call you, and either you can help them or not. And if I can't help them, I refer them to who I think can help them. But from that perspective, I think it's a world-class tool. Second piece of that is it's owned by Microsoft, so it's not going to ever be short of any money. when it needs to. Okay, this is a really good competing piece. Like Linda, went out there and bought the education piece and made that the LinkedIn education piece.
Yeah, I love that your examples. Another example I want to leave with the listeners is a lot of times I'll hear from people that say, "Gosh, I put all this work. I put my 5 minutes in. I'm doing all the work. I'm creating the post. I'm attaching a picture, and I'm not getting any engagement." So they quit. And so I always correlate LinkedIn and posting like I do the gym. You go to the gym, and if you go for a day and you don't get, you don't drop the weight, you don't gain the muscle, do you quit exercising? You're not going to be able to gain momentum on your social if you quit. And I promise you, to all the listeners, the people that you think are not paying attention, they are paying attention. Your colleagues are paying attention. They may not be engaging or interacting or liking or commenting, but they're paying attention. And over time, when people, like you were mentioning, when people think of, oh, I need this problem solved, you become the expert that can solve those problems. So it's really just a tweak of the mindset. And I think don't quit, don't give up, keep doing it. It's worth your time. I know I want to pivot. I have to talk about AI now with social media and all these tools that are being used now. AI is the hottest topic now. I don't see every one of my scrolls has something AI or machine learning in it. So I want to get your perspective on how these tools like ChatGPT are going to help or not help leaders and executives build their personal brands and connect with other opportunities. Can you share some insights?
Well, I can. In fact, I got a call yesterday on a Sunday from a client. And I mean, I really couldn't. I mean, it was hard for me to wrap my mind around, what had happened to her. So basically, the power of AI is, I have been working with her, trying to get, let me just frame this a little bit. Okay, she was born in another country. She's a U.S. citizen and here, but, there's a culture difference. No matter what, you grew up as a child someplace else, it's a different mindset. So I really had to work with her to get all this stuff that she had done, and it wasn't natural. To me, LinkedIn naturally works with American people because American people designed it, right? And they're adapting it. But the bottom line is this. So we had to get all the things that she had done, a lot of it was in another country, and none of that was merchandised. In other words, she didn't put on there that, she was the head of engineering, in this country, and that a panel had chose her to be the president of this engineering council, which did engineering decisions for major stuff like bridges and, things like that. And none of that was on her LinkedIn profile. And I said, hey, you don't have the option here. You're in a world-class perspective, but nobody sees that. So we're still in the process. So what had happened to her is this whole thing, which I'm still trying to get a debrief on. And if I understood her correctly, I mean, this system went through everything that was ever on her. Now we're talking ChatGPT, find everything on Susie Smith, specifically by name, arrayed it, task organized it into what it wanted to know. And a AI person gave her a phone call that talked to her in a way based on her personality style. And so, like I said, I think, the Wild West is out there. I mean, I haven't wrapped my head around that, but my point is everything going out here is available, right? So I think whether you like it or not, this is just an example of somebody's looking for somebody to solve a problem. They're using a tool, whether that be people or systems, and the more that you have out there, specifically that you solve problems, the greater your chance of coming up to the top of that pile. Because I do executive search, and people will say, well, Joe, I don't want to put that out there. I said, no problem. I said, you'll come up 375 out of 400, and I'll never see you. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm going to deal with the top 40. I'm going to search for people, and I get the top 40. I kind of look at them. Okay, that doesn't work. This works. Then I rearrange all those search words again and run it again, see who's in the top 40. And I'm in the top 40 in 10 different searches. There's probably going to be about 15 of the same people. And so to me, you have to win the quality content war, on LinkedIn, if you want to be considered for somebody calling you, to solve a problem or, to get, employment.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I want to kind of pivot a little bit again in the closing kind of last pieces of our time together. I know this year is a year for so many of career transitions, change, personal growth. I know what I want to do now. I know you've coached a lot of executives and military veterans who are transitioning into the private sector. And I want to get your perspective on the mindset shift people need to make when moving from one career path to another. Say they were in one industry, another, or they were working for a company, now they're self-employed. Any kind of two parts of that. What's the biggest mindset shifts they need to make? And then the second piece of that, what's the biggest mistake people make in doing that?
Well, for example, let's take, oil and gas industry is down. I mean, we're just going to make that assumption. So now I'm a petroleum engineer and I want to go into mechanical engineering or aeronautical engineering. Well, the shift is on your LinkedIn profile about 60% of all engineering is engineering, right?
Solving problems.
Yeah. So it's only in the finesse type, you have the specific thing. So you just change the stories that you tell and how you solve the problem. You talk about the mechanical engineering story in solving a petroleum engineering problem, because when you get that engineering, I mean, aeronautical is the same way. I mean, it's really about structure, strength, curves, all of those kind of things. And so it's how you tell the story. And that's why storytelling is so important, and the structure to it. Because, like, for example, in a project on LinkedIn, you only got 2,000 characters. So, I mean, think about it. You got to say who, what, when, where, how, and what the metrics were. And the other thing that people don't realize about LinkedIn is what makes you different than somebody else that's outstanding. Because I had this one guy came to me and he said, hey, Joe, I'm a world-class project manager and I'm just, I'm kind of floundering out here. And I said, okay, let me take a look at your LinkedIn profile. I said, okay. And I said, well, I'm not going to hire you. And he goes, but Joe, you know me inside and out. And I said, but that's the problem. I can't sell you. I am an executive recruiter and I can't sell you to a client. And he said, what are you talking about? He says, well, I'm an outstanding engineer. I work with project manager. I work with these, Forbes companies and all that kind of stuff. And I said, yeah. So your first sentence in your about section just says you're a great guy. I said, I see great guys and gals every day. And I said, what it needs to say is in the last 12 years, I've handled 7 projects with project teams from 5 to 27 people on projects that were $1.3 million to $227 million, and all of them were finished on time and under budget. Okay, that I can sell, but if I'm having to pull this out of you, and 10 years ago as an executive recruiter, I'd call and pull this out of you. Today, if you're not show ready, we just go to the person that is. Because employers will ask me, did you bring me the best? I said, I bring you the best that are ready for you. Because I didn't bring them the best. I physically know people, but I don't have time to dress them, and make sure that they got their cleats at the soccer game and, did they bring their jersey?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a really good point is, are you ready, right? How are you standing up against your potential competitors? With and everything these days, one job might have 500 applicants or more depending on the job, right? So like you said, if you're not show ready, the other 40 are. It's the 40 of you that are going to get looked at by the recruiter and by the staffing manager. And so I love that. I'm going to use that. Are you show ready? That's a career I've not had, is performing, but Joe, this has been an incredible conversation. I thank you so much for being here and sharing your insights with our listeners. And to our listeners, if you found today's episode valuable, please subscribe, share it with your listeners, leave a review, and connect with Joe. Until next time, keep leading with impact. And that's the Executive Connect podcast.